All right, friends, welcome. We are in week 10. Can you guys believe we're already in week 10 of this program? It has flown by. Means we only have, after this week, we have 5 more weeks for the entire program, really 4.5. But the reality is we have 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks until the belt exam opens. So we are coming up pretty quick. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about modularization and what that means with controllers and config files and models. And then we're going to finish up CRUD part 2. So we have our update value and our delete value that we're going to do. And that's going to set you up for users CRUD and then users CRUD modularized. You also have a discussion question due, so please make sure you go and do that. And then read all the way up to the Flask plus MySQL, CRUD dojos, and ninjas. That's going to be one for next week. That's going to be your core assignment. But again, this week, your 2 core assignments are users CRUD and users CRUD modularized. Okay. A little bit about what we've done, just as a recall. I know we did it on Tuesday and then Thursday, and we sort of walked through everything, but I want to do one more quick recap because then we're going to blow it all up at the end. We have our Flask plus MySQL project right here. We created video games, and within this, we've got our templates folder that has all of our HTMLs in there. We have our MWB, that's our MySQL Workbench file. That's our ERD. We have this connection file, and that creates my database connection. We've got our server PY. This is sort of, think about kind of like the general, the person who sends you, okay, whenever we make a request, it finds the route and it tells that request what to do. Whether we're going to just render a template or we're going to create a game, we're going to go to a dashboard, we can do all sorts of stuff. And that's what this server PY file does. And then lastly, we just said that we're creating a video game. So we created this class that had all of these different attributes, right? Our ID, our title, rating, platform, development studio, created at, and updated at. And this class is really where the functionality of what we can do with these certain objects, because this is object-oriented programming, really we're giving the functionality to these instances, and that functionality is in the version of class methods. We created 2 class methods. The first one is create game, and that has a couple of different values. It has a variable called query. That is really just our MySQL query. It's just something that we've done with MySQL. The difference is that we practice the safe passing of data by preventing SQL injection. And the way we do that is this way. We put our parentheses sign, our percentage sign, our parentheses, and then S, and that allows us to insert the value from our object with the key of title, key of rating, key of platform, key of development studio. Allows us to take those values and put them in there so we can actually prevent ourselves from having to deal with SQL injection. And it's a way that we can just make sure that our data is secure and that nobody's going to try to ruin it for us. This second portion is where we actually connect to my database right here. Remember, the big important thing is we have to put the database we're trying to connect to's name right there. And then we have a chained method. So right after there's a connection, while the connection's still live, we run this query DB, which comes from my MySQL connection, right? We bring that in. That takes in our query. And then the data that we're passing through, right? The data that comes from my server PY. We passed in data here. If I would have called this game and that here would have been game, I can still call this data, right? Because I'm just saying whatever I'm getting, whatever I'm receiving, I want to refer to it as data. But then once I call it, if I call this data here, then I need to call it data there. The second one we did is we got all games. So it's a little bit more of a challenge. It has a query. And if we remember MySQL connection, this file here tells you what each one's going to return. So when we have an insert query, it's going to return the ID number of the row inserted or whatever we just created. Select queries, which is our reading queries, is going to give us a list of dictionaries. And this is always going to give us a list of dictionaries, even if we put in a condition where we say, like where ID equals 3. It might just bring back the value that has the ID of 3, but the way it brings it back is in a list of dictionaries. So we need to handle that accordingly. And then with update and delete, that actually returns nothing to us. So we don't need to do anything with it. Cool. And so what we're doing here is we're saying, hey, results, because this is a select, we know results is going to be a list of dictionaries. And so we're getting this value back, or all of the things from games, which is going to be a list of dictionaries. I create this variable games, which is just an empty list. And what I'm doing is I'm iterating through each of those dictionaries, and I am appending the class instance. And because I'm in my video game, it's going to be my video game class of that game right there, of whatever that game represents. And I'm appending it to my list games. And so what this is doing is this is creating a class instance instead of just a dictionary that all I can do is read. I create a class instance of that. So now I actually have power to, if let's say that there was some static method or instance method that I also had within my class, then I have the power to do that and to run that. Whereas if it was just a dictionary, that's all I'm reading. And then we return that. So that way, whenever we get that, we can see that. So if I run this, we'll see what we have. And I Python server.py. Okay. So if I come here to localhost 5000, here's our video game palace. We can create a game. I can go to my dashboard and that has all my games that I've created, right? Cool. So what we're going to do today is we are going to do something called modularization. Now, for what we're sort of dealing with, our scale at the moment, it's not that big of a deal, right? Kind of having everything, as you saw, we don't have that many values. We don't have that many sort of pieces. Let's just look at this code before we modularize. We don't have that many things, right? In my server PY, we just kind of have these 3 routes. Let's say we had some big application that had many classes. I had a user class. I had think of like Facebook, right? You have marketplace. And so you have an item class. You've got, maybe a friends, or you have something, you have all these different classes. Having everything in one file is going to get very complicated, where maybe we can mess up sort of like variable stuff. And then B, when we're decoding or we're trying to debug our code, if everything lives in one file, it can get very confusing, right? It's really hard to find things, and following that's going to be really challenging. And so what we can do is we can actually modularize our code. Really what that means is break it out into things that make sense, break it out into maybe different kind of routes or things that are alike. So if I'm dealing with Facebook Marketplace, maybe I have all my marketplace stuff on one end, and I've got all my user stuff on another end, and I have all my ad stuff on another end, or whatever. So that way I know if there is a issue with my marketplace, I don't have to look through everything. I just have to go to my marketplace section and I can work on that. This is what we call a monolithic file, meaning that everything lives in it. And we are going to not have that anymore. We're going to have what we call a modularized file, or modularized application. And so we're going to break it out into many pieces. Okay. So let's kind of follow along and see how we're going to do that. Here's what it looks like on modularized. And this is exactly what ours looks like, minus the static folder. We're not doing CSS, so it's okay. What we're going to do is we're actually going to create a folder. We're going to call it Flask app, or we'll call it game app. Game app. And what I want you to notice, and this does not do a very good job of this, is Flask app is on the same level as server PY. So it's on the same level as server PY. So let's go ahead and let's go modularize our code. So what I'm going to do,
Thank you for saying that, Will, because I was looking at that earlier and I was kind of confusing because I was thinking they were all the servers will be all under the same
yeah,
folder, and this
yeah,
wasn't.
yeah, these lines represent like this is within this. This is within this. It's not super inherent, right? In templates, this line represents everything up to results is within templates. And this far line shows the init py and everything up to init py is within Flask app. It doesn't really show that. So yeah, no, absolutely. I'm sorry that that's a little bit confusing because I was a little bit confused when I was looking at it too. Cool.
Thank you.
So yeah, of course. So what I'm going to do is let's go create our game app. So I just created a new folder called game app. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my templates. I just drag it. And now I'm going to move it into game app. Okay, perfect. What I'm also going to do is you see that I've got 3 more folders that I need to add. So I have templates, that's fine, but I have these 3 folders, my config folder, my controllers folder, and my models. So I'm going to come in here and within game app, I'm going to say config. Within game app again, I'm going to say controllers. And lastly, within game app, I'm going to say models. These are going to be where, as you can assume, we're going to have our models, all of our model files, our config file, and our controllers. This is our functionality of what we're doing. So very quickly, and just what we've done so far, and what we've created so far before we break things kind of in pieces, is all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my MySQL connection and I'm going to drag it to my config file folder. So move it. Okay. Then I'm also going to take my model and I'm going to go into models. Okay. Now, okay. So that's good. And I kind of want to just follow this so that way you guys can do it. So we created the app folder. What I also have to do is create a dunder init.py. Now, this is something that's going to run upon creation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into, again, my game app. I'm going to create a file. I'm going to say dunder init dunder.py. Cool. So that's within my file. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to insert this code. Now, it's the from Flask import Flask, the app, and then my secret key. But if I come here, you can see I've got from Flask import Flask, app equals Flask dunder name. So I can actually just take these two. And I'm going to say control X. We go in my init file. I'm going to say control Y. And then my last thing I have to do is I need to take my secret key, which if I'm just doing session. So I'm going to say, because we'll end up having session in this. So I'm going to say app.secret key is, okay, perfect. Cool. Now, remove the last 2 lines above from server PY. So we want to make sure we remove these, which is what it's saying 2 lines is meaning this, because this is an import line. So we remove those, which we did. So we still want to have something in my server PY. So in my server PY, I still need this app.run, right? This is still what's running my file. So I need to import this app, right? App is no longer being defined in my server PY. It was defined up here, right? Because I had this code. Now it's being defined in my init PY. So what I need to say is from game app import app. Now, game app is the name of my application. If I were to call this unicorn, I'd say from unicorn import app. And so when I say that, it goes to this init file and it brings in this and imports that to my server PY. So now when I say app.run, I can actually run my file. I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions on breaking up our server PY into an init PY? Okay. What we're then going to do is we're going to go to our controllers. We've already handled our config. All we're doing in our config is just, we're not really changing anything, but now I have this config file, right? And now it just lives, or it's config folder, and then my file just lives in that. So nothing's really changing there. Let's close this, close this, close this, close this. Now what I want to do is, I've already done that, right? Create a PY file named after what we are controlling in pluralization form. Sorry about that. So when I am dealing with games or video games, right? That's what I'm dealing with, is a video game. When we're dealing with our model, we say video game in the singular version .py. When we go controller, we're identifying what are we controlling, and it's video games, but we do it in the plural version. So I'm going to say video games.py. Cool. Now, here is where we're going to grab a lot of the information from my server PY, where we are going to say from Flask import render template, request, redirect, and session. Cool. We need to import our app. So we'll say from game app, import app. And then when we are dealing with our, if we look at our server PY, remember how we said video game, right? And we were able to bring that in from this. I need to do the same thing. I'm going to move all of this really in to my controller. I'm actually just going to do this. My server PY is going to be very bare bones. It's going to be this. Actually, it doesn't even need this. And I'm going to move into my video games. I'm going to move all this. But if I want to access the class of video game, I need to bring that in. And the way we do it is we say from game_app .models .video game, so the file, import video game. So instead of just saying from video game, import video game, we say, hey, from this app, go into my models, and then there's a file called video game. We don't need the PY, it assumes that. Go ahead and import from there the class of video game. And so now my controller is modularized. This is where everything that we're doing to control that model, in this case, handling routing, creating, updating, deleting, all of that lives within my controller. That's kind of the functionality of my application. My model sets up what the capabilities are of my video game. The controller says, okay, now I want to execute, ability X or ability Y. Cool.
Well, quick question.
Yeah.
On this one you put video games. Well, and then on the example it said burgers. Will it always be like plural? Or is that's just a coincidence?
Yeah. So create a PY file named after what we are controlling. So in this case was video games in a pluralization form. So yeah, always have it as a plural.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Now the last thing, because we are going to run our server, right? This is really what's running it. This is what's running our app. I need to give it access to my routes. right? So what I say is from game app dot controllers, import video games. You can see that here. From Flask app dot controllers, instead we called it game app, import burgers. This is saying, okay, now if you forget to do this and you try to run it, it's going to say, I don't know what that route is because we didn't give it access to my routes of slash or create game or dashboard. So we have to say, hey, I want you to have access to my routes here. If I had multiple, let's say I had users, I could say like users. I don't, but I could. Okay, so this is fully modularized. Now this is all that lives in my server PY. And again, my templates lives here. My models, controllers, and config, that's kind of what we changed, right? We have a config, we have our controllers, that's our functionality, we have our models, which is our video game model, and then we have this init py that's actually running that. I don't need render template and all that because I'm not going to do that here. I'm just going to bring in Flask so I can run this. And then if we have any sort of session, we need a secret key. And so I put that right here. I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions or anything you'd like me to go over from a modularization standpoint?
Quick question, Will.
Mhm.
I have a question when it comes to my SQL.
Uh-huh.
So since I upgraded to Sonoma,
Uh-huh.
how do I know if my password is root or root? Because I was a little stuck when it comes to the users assignment.
Usually on Mac, they require 8 characters to be root. But you should still be able to open MySQL Workbench, right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, so whenever you go into that and you click like a local instance, because I have another student in another class who has this, and they just can't use the ERD, but then after that, once the ERD is created, they can go in and do that. So if you log into like MySQL Workbench and you go to, it opens up. If you click here, you should be able to have a password here. Are you able to do that?
No, mine doesn't show that. It doesn't show the password.
Oh, okay. So great question. I would say that I know that there's a way to change the password. I would try root, and if that doesn't work, then we can talk and I can try to figure out how to change the password. I think there's in your documentation, there's changing password, but I would try root, and if that doesn't work, did you try that already?
Yes, I did try that and it worked. I was just, I was just playing around like guessing.
Uh-huh.
So pretty much I just didn't know if it's just root or root,
So
That's
you
why
created yeah, great question. When you downloaded this, you created that. Usually for Mac, again, it requires 8 characters, so we say root. And then for Windows, it just requires 4 characters, so we say root. So like on my Mac, before I went up to Sonoma, in my config file, I had to go in and say root right there.
Oh,
So yeah, so you just change that right there. Great question though. Any other questions about this modularization?
Not yet.
Okay. I'm going to run this. It's still running, and this is just to make sure that we didn't break anything and that our modularization is working. I have a feeling that it might not. Oh, it does. Hey, oh. My feeling was when I think I actually automatically did this, but I want to point this out. Because we changed the location of my config file as well, in my model, I had to say from gameapp.config.mysql connection import connect to MySQL. I believe prior to that, we just had from, MySQL connection, import connect to MySQL. Now we have to give the path from my folder to my config folder to my MySQL connection file to import that file, to import that functionality. So that's another change. And we can see that here on the dashboard as well. Oops, sorry. Probably go through my models. We can see that. So we just say flask.config.MySQL connection. Cool. So, any questions on that? Any questions on modularization?
So
No,
first,
I think we just need to practice it.
Yeah. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
yeah, I just said so far so good. Now we
Okay.
have
Yeah. So the second part of today that we need to do is, so we modularized, great. Now we need to practice our update and our delete functionality. All right, we're able to create and we're able to read. Now let's do some updating and deleting. So if I'm wanting to write this update, right? I'm wanting to create an update for my video game. Where am I going to do that? What file am I going to create this update in? Kick out of everything.
On your controllers, on your, yeah, controllers, your video games.py.
In here?
Yes.
Okay. That's going to be one portion of it, right? You're right. We are going to have a route that takes that. But remember, our controller just allows us to use the tools that we have, right? Or the functionalities of each of our classes, or, if we're doing some sort of routing stuff. So what I typically like to do before I build this out is I like to go into my model and I like to say, okay, let's create that functionality first. Let's create that functionality first. So I'm going to create a class method and it's going to be called def update. We said create game, so I'm going to say update game. It is going to take in, and then we'll kind of look at this here in a second. It's going to take in, it's a class method, so it does that, right? We always take in CLS, and it's going to take in some data. Because I'm updating, I need to give it the data that I want to update, right? And then if we just look at our query here, we have update, that's our main kind of keyword, friends. So what table are we doing? Set, and then we pass in the value that we have, or the attribute of that, and then the value we want to update it to. Last name, email, occupation. The last thing we need to do is we need to say where ID equals, and then we have to pass in the ID, or the element, or the, sorry, not element, that's not a great word, the instance we want to update. Right? Cool. And then we can just say return connect to MySQL. All this does is this just returns that value, which is going to be none, because we know from my config file that my update and delete is going to return nothing, but that's just how we're going to call it. Cool. So let's go. We've done this, right? And again, we are updating in games, which if we look, games is what we called it. We're setting our title to title, rating to rating, platform to platform, development studio to development studio, where ID equals the ID that we're passing in. Cool, so this looks great. Now let's go create the functionality for this. What I would then do, now that we have that, and we're looking at our document, what makes the most sense? Maybe right here, we would have like an edit button and maybe a delete button. You guys think that makes sense? Edit and delete kind of on the
Yeah, I
side of this
like that.
table. Yeah, so let's go do that. So we can go into my templates and we're on our dashboard. We have all this stuff. And so what I can do, maybe we're going to call this a TH for actions is what we'll call it. And so here's what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a TD data, and then I'm going to have a button, or let's just have a tag. That's going to be an href because I need to send it to some route, right? Oops. There we go. And I'm going to say edit pipe. Then I have an a tag that says delete. Okay, so if I refresh, cool, we have an edit and delete. Great.
Cool.
Now what I need to do is I need to say, well, when they click this link, what do I want to do here? Where do I want it to go? So what do you guys think we should do? Where's that referring to?
So it's gonna take you back to the index.html.
It's not going to take me back to my index. Where in my application handles all my routing?
Mm.
Your controllers.
Yeah, my controller, right? It has this slash, and then we have slash create game, slash dashboard. Now, I'm going to change it up a little bit. So don't get me here. There's this idea called RESTful routing, where and it's a big thing with APIs. It's called RESTful APIs or RESTful routing. You're going to see that a lot on job interviews. And really, it's a paradigm that we can do to kind of make it even easier to understand what's going on within our code, within our API, and also to differentiate against different kind of functionalities. So an example of this would be with RESTful routing, instead of having like create game, update game, those are all kind of unique. I could have slash game slash create. So now I know when I come here, I have to say slash game slash create. That's all I have to change there. But what's nice about it is what I can do next is I could say at app.route. I can say slash game slash edit. And if I'm going to delete, I could say slash game slash delete. Or if I'm going to just get one, right? If I just want to see one game, I could say slash game slash ID. You know, so it's always slash game slash the functionality that you're doing. This is an example of RESTful routing, to where it's following this same pattern instead of having just unique routes all over the place. Does that make sense?
Yes, I actually like that better.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Makes it much easier. So something I forgot is in our dashboard, we need, or we haven't even done it yet, but if you see here, sorry. And if you remember from our actual video game PY, there's some information we need. We need all the values that we're updating. And we also need the ID number, right? The ID number of whatever we're editing. So a pretty clever way is each of these rows represents just that specific instance, right? Because we're iterating through. We're saying for game in all games. And so this represents the game title, the game rating, game platform, development studio. But if we go all the way back to Tuesday, when we did this, get all games, what get all games is doing is it's creating a class instance of the game, right? So I have access to all of this information. So knowing that, what I can do is I can say /game /edit /game.id. Because I have access to that, right? I'm still within this, and game here represents the specific game. If I would call this unicorn, I'd say unicorn.id. But now this is going to allow us to inject. I think I just do that. That actual ID. So if I were to refresh and I hover over, let's cancel. If you can see in the very bottom left, it says localhost 5000 /game/edit/1. That's the ID of this value. And if I go here, you can see how it changes, right? It's dynamic. It changes because this row, the data that we're dealing with, its ID was 2. The first row, the ID is 1. Do you guys see that in the very bottom left of my screen?
Yes.
Cool.
Oh,
So
yeah.
by knowing that, that's how we can pass that information. And we'll just quickly do delete, even though we don't have it yet. We can say /game/delete/ same thing. We have game.id. So now if I were to hover over this, bring it back up, hover over it. I need to refresh. Now I hover over it and you get delete 2, delete 1. So it's a way that we can kind of pass that information when we want it. Cool. So we've handled this in my HTML. So when this is clicked, we've said, where is this going? When this is clicked in my HTML, if I click this, what file is it going to go look at?
To
What handles-
your controllers.
Exactly, right? That controllers handles all my routing. So for this, we have game/edit/ID. That's great. And remember, we have to say int ID.
Because it's a number. It's
Uh-huh.
the ID number, so it has to be
Yeah.
an integer.
Exactly. Exactly. So this is going to be a little bit challenging, but we'll kind of walk through this. When I go to edit, do I just want to, I'm not passing any information, right? What is the functionality I'd want to do? Like what would I want to see if I was a user and I clicked this and I clicked edit? What would I expect it to take me to?
Back to the initial, like when you were creating it, but you're
Exactly.
not really creating it.
Yeah, just like a form, right?
Mhm.
Kind of like this, kind of like this, right? But it just might say like edit Halo or edit Kingdom Hearts. So before I can even update, I need to go and I need to grab my game so I can show that, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take in that game ID. I could have just called that ID. I called it game ID up here. That's fine. And I'm going to create this data dictionary that just has one key of ID. Then what it does is it creates this game variable, and I need to go into my video game class and just get a singular game. Now I don't have get game yet, right? I don't have that. So let's go create it. Let's go create that. So this is get all games, update game. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say at class method, and I'm going to say def get game. And I might even call this get one game because that just makes more sense to me. And I can go change that on the other file. Get one game. And what this is going to do is this is just going to run a quick query that says select all from games where the ID matches the ID that we're passing in. Now, where does this ID come from? Right here, this word ID. Where does that come from? You remember?
That's from the template.
Not quite. Remember thinking about the functionality of how my computer goes from one place to another. What calls this method? Where is this method called?
Again, it's back in the controllers then.
Controller, right? And so I'm passing in this data. This could be called unicorn. It doesn't matter what it's called. Let's call it data, but we can call it unicorn. We can call it cupcake. Doesn't matter. This is really crucial. Here, let me annotate real fast. Okay. In this dictionary, again, it doesn't matter what it's called, but in this dictionary, I've got a key of ID. This key is what we are referring to when we say ID. Because we are taking in data. Again, this doesn't matter what this is called, but we're just saying whatever this is, it's got a key of ID. Had I called it game ID : game ID, I would need to refer to this as game ID. Or else it's going to say, I don't know what this is, right? You're referring to ID, but all I see are keys of game ID. And so this is really important. This value of whatever we're doing, and this doesn't matter if we're up here, right? Anytime we are doing something like this, these are coming from the keys of whatever we're passing through. So again, if you call it something else, if you call it game ID right here, or you called like one title or game title, game rating, game platform, game development studio, game underscore, all of those, right? On the left side. If that's your key name, then that's what you're referring to right here. So these are your key names. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Cool. So what we're doing is we're selecting all, where ID matches the ID that we're passing in. And we're saying result equals connect to MySQL query DB. Now with a select, what does this always bring me back? What is a select statement? And that's stated here. What does a select statement always bring me back? Always brings me back a list of
The
dictionaries.
dictionaries. Oh.
Yeah. Even if, in this case, we should only have one that has this ID, right? We won't have multiple IDs because MySQL is auto incrementing. But this is always giving me a list of dictionaries. So what's important is I want to make this a class instance so I have access to methodology and I have access to different things. But I'm going to say result, which is up here. If I would have called this, query results, then this would be query result. And the first value in that list at index position 0. Again, there should only be one, but it's just the first value. So we say results of index 0. Does that make sense?
Excuse me, Will.
Yeah.
Can you just please repeat what you just said right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime we run a select statement, we are going to get back a list of dictionaries. So results at this point, let's say that its ID of 1 is going to result, SULT is going to equal, and it's going to have, title, it's going to have, Halo, if we're getting the first one, and then we have, rating, E, and these would be strings, right? And so on and so forth. And it's going to be this, right? But what's important is it is a list of dictionaries. We want this to not just be a dictionary, in theory, when we run this, we should just get a list of a singular dictionary. Right? If I was getting all games, right now we have 2 games. What this results would be is a list of 1 game, 2 games. These are my curly brackets. That's my results of get all games. When we're getting 1 game, my result is this. Right? Now, getting the values in the dictionary is fine. We can read that. That's great. But we lose all the power of object-oriented programming because we no longer have the power of the classes, right? It's just a read-only, don't really do anything with it. So what we do is we say, hey, result of 0, which is this first and probably only and should be only value. I want to make this a class instance of, and we're in the video game, class up at the top. So we're going to take this dictionary and make it a video game instance. So it's now no longer just a dictionary, it's going to be a class instance. And that's what we're returning, the class instance of this dictionary. Does that make sense? Or did I confuse you? Yeah. Seems a little bit of confusion. If I were to print results right now, just after line 33, it's going to just give me a list. And that list should have 1 dictionary. And that dictionary should be all values where the ID matched, you know, if we said 1, this is going to be my entire Halo. So it's going to be, if I go to dashboard, all this information, Halo, E, cross-platform, Bungie, with also my ID, my created app, my updated app. Just an entire dictionary that has all that information. That's what result is getting. But it's a list. I want a class instance of that so I can have the power of object-oriented programming. And so what I'm returning is I'm saying, I don't want to return this list of a powerless dictionary. I just want this instance because we're assuming that there should only be 1 because the ID should auto increment, right? But I want a video game instance of my result. So what we're returning is we're saying, hey, grab the 0 index position. So the first one in my list should be should be the only one, but grab this value. So the computer says, okay, great. I've grabbed that value. Just kind of take it out of my list here. And now we're saying, I want to run a class. I want to run that through my current class. So it takes this instance or this dictionary and it runs this init file, takes my data. So again, we have access to ID, title, rating, platform, development studio, created at, updated at, and creates this class instance with all my information I got in my result. And that's what it gives me back. So the power of that is when I get this 1 game, now my game here represents a video game instance of Halo, not just a dictionary that has readable values. Does that make more sense? How are you guys feeling with that?
I would say a little okay.
Okay. We'll keep going and then we'll kind of circle back. Now that I have that, I want to return render template to something called edit game.html, and I want to pass my game, right, that I just got. So if it's Halo or my first one, it's going to pass all of that information that we got back. Or if it's another game, it's gonna pass all that information. So I don't have this template HTML. So let's go ahead and make it. So I'm gonna say edit underscore game dot HTML. And what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to I'm not gonna redo, there's no need to reinvent the wheel here. I come here. And because I already have my form that basically has everything that I need, right? I can just come here and I might even actually just take this whole thing. Copy within my body. I paste and I can say edit. Game dot title. I can still have my dashboard if I want to go there. But now I've got this form that's going to get me my information. So I can say edit game. Okay. I'm going to pause here before we kind of go into the other functionality here. Server's still running. I refresh. Now if I click here, it says edit Halo. Go back to my dashboard and I click Kingdom Hearts, edit Kingdom Hearts. So my last thing I can do to kind of really help, and this might be like a black belt feature on the exam, is I could say value, because I have access to my game. I could say game.title, value, game.rating, value equals game.platform. And then lastly, I could say value equals game dot development studio. So if I refresh, you can see that it pre-populates all my information from my database. So if I go to dashboard and I go to edit, here now it gets Halo, cross-platform, Bungie, edit, Kingdom Hearts, PlayStation, Squaresoft. Okay. Now, as a reminder, the reason we can say game.title or game.anything is in my controller, I'm passing it as game. I'm passing that game that we got. We got one game. Right? We got one. We created this class instance of it. This is what it returned. So it returned that specific game. And we called it game. And then I said, I want my edit underscore game HTML to have access to those values. I'm going to call it game. So whatever is on my left is what I refer to it as in my HTML. Whatever's on my right is its value, which is coming from here. So that's why it says game equals game. And I can refer to it here. Game.title, game.rating, platform, development studio. I'm going to pause there. How are we feeling? That good, huh? We have all of this week, and then we're going to keep going through this. We have another 4 weeks, so I know that it feels like you're drinking from a fire hose, but it'll sort of level out here in a bit. The last thing we need to do is we've set up this form But we now need the functionality of updating, right? We have that built in my class, my update game, where I've got title, rating, development studio, platform, and ID. So now I just need to do that, right? I need to grab that information. So I can say, edit game.html, and I could say update. Now I also want to pass in the ID because I know I'm going to need access to it. So I could have a hidden input if I wanted that had that ID, or I could just do it up here. That says game.id. So once this form is filled out and they click this edit game, it's going to go into my controller and try to find this route. We don't have that. So we have game create, game edit. So I'm going to, first off, I'm going to move this up. I like to have it like my base stuff and then my functionality. So now let's say app route / update / and we said int ID. We do our this, I say int. We'll just call it game _ ID so we can kind of stay normal. Cool. So we have this game update int game ID, its methods post. Now I actually need to handle that. So I'm going to say def update game that's taking in my game ID. And now here, I need to pass in my data, right? I need to pass in my data. And what this is doing is this is going to take this ID from my game ID up here. And then it's also going to take all the values from my form and create this data. And then we're going to run from my model, we're going to run the update game. So what it's going to do is it's going to take all my information. It's going to come here to update game, take this data. It's going to fill it in accordingly. Again, these match my keys here. For ID, development studio, it's going to run my query, and then we're done. I don't even think we need this return statement because it's fine because we're not taking anything back. Okay, so let's go test it. And because it's a request, we also have to say methods equals post up here. Right. So now if I come here and I say edit Halo, and I want to change this to 343 industries. I say edit game. Takes us back, and you see that we have now edited our game. Go to edit again. I could change it back to Bungie. I could do whatever. But now, and we can even see down here that it running query update, and we updated where the ID was 1. And then we automatically get redirected to my dashboard. So it goes up here to dashboard. It runs get all games, which it does, select all from games, and then it shows it here. Now, if you do it this way, just as like a heads up, then you have to, first off, I wouldn't request a pass in form like this because when we get to password hashing, you're going to have to break it down anyway. So get in the practice of doing it like this because you're going to have to do that anyway. But you can, if you do it this way, if you're just doing it for right now, you have to create a hidden input within your form that has the ID because it needs to know what ID they're dealing with there. So we'll save, delete. Delete's super easy. Yeah, delete super easy, but we'll save that for we'll save that for Thursday. And then we'll do that at the very beginning. It's just this. Actually just real quickly, and then we don't need to kind of kick the can down the road. I can just say this game ID, def delete game. We're taking in the ID just like we have up there. And we're going to run delete game, pass in the ID that we have. We don't have that yet, so let's go make that. At class method, delete game, and all we say is delete from games where ID matches the ID. That's it. That's all delete is. And then we redirect back to dashboard. So if I were to come here, refresh, and I say Kingdom Hearts, it's now gone. Now deleted that. So again, all we do is we have this already. We've already said game slash delete slash int game. That's on our dashboard. We already had that. Game slash delete slash ID. And then we just run this delete game. That's taken in that ID. We pass that ID to my delete game method, class method, sorry. Delete game. And we just say delete from games where ID matches the ID. Delete's super simple. And that's it. That is full CRUD functionality for our application. Any questions?
Yes. So when will the lecture be posted today?
I will post it in the next, I don't know, hour or two.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I know we went through a lot today. Kevin, you missed out on, we did modularization, update and delete. This is a pretty heavy lecture. Quite a bit of stuff. But Estrella, Jeffrey, how are we feeling?
I feel a little better, but I will just watch the video and just code along. I think that's the best way that I'm gonna.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Estrella, how you doing? Maybe she stepped away. Okay. Just as a reminder, next class we're going to do an algorithm, and then we'll do that at the beginning. And if there's any questions after, then we can, since we finished all of CRUD and modularization, if there's any questions after, I'm happy to do that. But we'll do an algo this week. Again, you have your 2 core assignments: users CRUD modularized, and you have a singular discussion question. So please make sure you do that. Other than that, that is all I have for you guys. I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful night, and I will see you on Thursday.
You too, Will. Thank you.
Thank you.